You don't actually get anything in the end for sucking up to Trump.
Yeah.
Right. As long as you want to do one thing that is against Trump's interest, because Mike Turner, it wasn't exactly Adam Kinzinger over there on the Hill. He maintained his views on national security, but he didn't vote for impeachment. He voted for Trump. Yeah, he surrogates for Trump sometimes on TV. So, what was his reward for all that? Nada. All right, we are back with John Avlon, author, journalist, recent congressional candidate. We'll get to that in a second. He's also host of the new Bulwark podcast, How to Fix It. What's going on, man?
Hey, man, it's good to talk to you as always.
Good to talk to you, too. I want to get to the new pod. I want to do just briefly on some run for something lessons. But first, we got some news on the Hill that I really wanted to pick your brain about. Mike Turner, who is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, or was set to be the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, has been purged by Trump and Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson says that apparently Trump asked him to get rid of Turner. This might seem like kind of inside baseball congressional news, but to me, it is very ominous because Mike Turner is a strong national security hawk, pro-Ukraine, and it seems to me to signal that they don't want anybody in these top intel, top secret meetings, pushing back on Tulsi or pushing back on whatever it is that Trump is trying to rationalize. So I don't know, pretty ominous for me. Wondering if you had thoughts on it.
It is ominous to anyone paying attention, and don't dismiss this as some kind of inside baseball house politics. This is ominous on three different levels. First, it shows a complete destruction of the separation of powers as the founders intended, because Congress, the Speaker of the House, is acting like a willing lapdog for the incoming White House. And for the President of the United States to get involved with a committee chairmanship means this is a priority for him, who is not traditionally focused on the details of government.
Yeah.
Right. So all of a sudden, you're removing a strong conservative who happens to be strong on national security. By the way, also blowing up the lie that a lot of Republicans were telling themselves that this would be some kind of new Trump with a bigger tent. And we wouldn't actually, right? How many times in history do we need to learn that people who do what they say they're going to do? He is going to commit himself to what seems to be a neo-isolationist foreign policy that is weak on autocrats around the world. And one of the stakes of this election, as many of us were making the case, is the fate of Ukraine, is the support for our fellow democracies against autocratic aggression. And the removal of Turner is about a quashing of dissent, something we've seen a lot of, this falling in line. It shows that there's a voluntary sort of self-castration of the congressional branch out of fealty, this lapdog impulse in the House of Representatives, even by the Speaker of the House. And it says very bad things about the United States laying claim to any credible vision of remaining the leader of the free world, because that's not what Donald Trump is interested in. And kneecapping Mike Turner is part and parcel with that. So watch out, pay attention.
Also, it shows that you don't actually get anything in the end for sucking up to Trump. Right. As long as you want to do one thing that is against Trump's interest, because Mike Turner, it wasn't exactly Adam Kinzinger over there on the Hill. He maintained his views on national security, but he didn't vote for impeachment. He voted for Trump. Yeah, he surrogates for Trump sometimes on TV. So, what was his reward for all that?
Well, that's exactly right. This is about fealty. This is about walking in lockstep. And look, you can try to say, I'll give Trump administration one credit for the Abraham Accords, let's say.
Sure.
There are always good things that can come about, but this persistent focus on kneecapping strong foreign policy, traditional, what had been bipartisan American foreign policy, and knocking out one of their own at the incoming president's behest, that is sinister. And if you don't think so, you're probably not paying attention.
I'm going to have more on this over on YouTube. I've got the ranking Dem member on that committee, Jim Himes. Couldn't get to him this morning, but I think we're going to talk this afternoon, so folks can check it out on our YouTube feed. I want to get also your take on the Biden farewell. daily listeners of the podcast will probably know that I was not overcome with warm feelings when it came to this farewell, and really just had to turn it off actually and read it on my phone. But you, as you know, maybe somebody that has a little bit more distance or a little bit more of a historical view, having been a speechwriter, having written about this, wondering what your thoughts were on his speech last night.
Yeah, I thought it was a strong farewell address that will stand the test of time, and I do view it through a historic prism. Don't get caught up in the politics of the moment for things like this. You're writing for posterity. And I wrote a book on George Washington's farewell address, so I see it through that prism as well. George Washington started off an occasional tradition of the most powerful farewell addresses being focused on warnings, which is not typically the thing you think of with a farewell address. Usually you think you're going to take a valedictory, a victory lap and ride off onto the sunset. Washington warned primarily about the dangers of what we would call hyperpartisanship, also excessive debt and foreign interference in our elections. All things we're dealing with today. Yeah. Probably the second most famous farewell address is Eisenhower, where he warns about the rise of the military-industrial complex. And so if you look at this speech,
Ronnie, you got Ronnie defining Shiny City on the Hill. Throw him in there too.
Ronald Reagan's, written by Peggy Noonan, as I understand, is a beautiful farewell address, and it is a kind of touchstone document, but it is a love letter to a certain kind, to his vision of America. Sure. It's not a warning, and that's the tradition I would put this in. Biden gave a very full-throated warning about the rise of a new oligarchy. Rooted in technology that is undermining our ability to reason together as a democracy. He did not pull punches. It was stark, especially by any historical standard. And he also talked about, look, we've dealt with oligarchies in the past. They can undermine not just democracies, but any form of government. The founders were incredibly concerned about deep disparities between the super rich and the working poor, because that's how governments have been destabilized throughout human history. And what he said is, look, we just made the robber barons, have the laws that apply to everybody else apply to them. And it led to the greatest economic period in our history, and the growth of the great American middle class, which I think Biden does deserve a lot of credit for and will receive more in the eyes of history than maybe from you.
I give credit. The economy is fine. The economy is good. The things that I worry about in the eyes of history is that the thing we'll be remembered for is just the disastrous decision that allowed us, that got us to this place where Donald Trump is coming back in the office. And so, everything else kind of gets overshadowed by that a little bit. The CHIPS Act, I don't know if they're going to be talking about the CHIPS Act in 2092,
Look, obviously, if you see the pantheon of presidents, he's going to be like Benjamin Harrison, sort of sandwiched between two Trumps, and Harrison's class Grover Cleveland. I will history nerd with you all day long. But I think, he did, between the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act and 300 bipartisan bills and the climate change things he got passed, probably did more in the fullness of time to help rebuild the middle class. Now, that could easily get derailed. He has certainly problems with perceptions of vigor, which reminds us how much politics is on a strength, weakness, access. But if you look at his economic record, job growth, wage growth, certainly stock market, although that was not his focus. I think one of the things people will puzzle over is that there was such disquiet. I think the deal is that the affordability crisis and the middle class squeeze that's been going on for decades was really insulted by inflation. And that's a lesson one of many lessons Democrats need to keep in mind going forward. But it was a strong speech and one worth reading, not necessarily listening to, if you can't handle the halting tone.
One worth reading. That's true. If people can read in the future, I don't know, after TikTok and Redbook. If people can read, then I think he'll be in better shape. If they can only watch short form video, I don't think it will probably age that well. One last thing on the Biden speech that struck me. Just this focus on the tech oligarchs and the modern day robber barons. All of that has congealed in the last month, right? I mean, it's intriguing to do a speech that is really quite different from what the speech would have looked like, in any different moment of his presidency, right? That it is, based upon just how quickly, these tech billionaires have cozied up to Trump and gotten their claws in our government. He didn't really, when he was a candidate, he wasn't really talking about this. Kamala didn't really talk about this that much, and it's just pretty striking that you're using your farewell address to address something that is really only come into focus in the last month. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think that shows how urgent it is, but I think it is about tectonic plates as well as a reaction to sort of the lining up to kiss the ring, which like a lot of CEOs have convinced themselves are basically a form of fiduciary duty to their shareholders. That Trump is transactional. If people kiss the ring, maybe you get beneficial. And by the way, that's not the way democracy traditionally works, certainly here in America. But the larger issue, I mean, he had a very pointed paragraph about the free press. About the way that disinformation and misinformation is free flowing through these social medias, that he referenced Zuckerberg's recent decision obliquely to sort of pull the goalie when it comes to fact checkers, and the way that spells dangerous things for our democracy, and probably made a nod to some of the work that Jonathan Haidt's been doing about protecting our kids from these algorithms as well. So I don't think it was just sort of short-term sour grapes about the shows of fealty we're seeing. I think it's about something deeper. And I think in Kamala's case, look, she's from the Bay Area. She, I think, was not full-throated enough, but trying to say that, look, the extent this administration has not been pro-technology, she comes from a different perspective. But obviously all that's academic.
Here's a really quick academic item on running for office. One thing I'm going to be urging people, including you, I'm not putting you on the spot right now. It's still only 2 months. That if you wanted to run for office, if you got heterodox views on things, if you want to run for office as a Democrat and you got heterodox views on things, I should say, 2026 is probably going to be a good time to run. Maybe not, but if you're, making a bet, if you're putting your chips down, I would make a bet that Donald Trump does not wear that well back in the White House, and that his first midterm will be as disastrous as the last midterm is. And it's at these moments when kind of new voices can emerge. And so I'm wondering if you, A, agree with that, and B, if so, if there are any lessons you'd like to share for people that might be thinking about that.
I do agree with that. I think now's the time for citizens to step up and sort of strengthen their civic backbone and get in the arena. That's what I did earlier this year because I cared so much about the stakes of this race that I didn't feel like talking about it on TV. I'm glad I ran. I do think the pendulum's going to swing back. I would say to folks who want to run, whether it's for Congress or any local, run. Democracy depends on people who show up. And there are a lot of disincentives to run that we've set up. But people should not just talk about it or listen about it. They should do something about it. And I think liberals are about to fall in love with federalism and see the wisdom of those structures. And I think that is yet another safety valve the founders put in place that's worth leaning into. I have a couple of learnings from running. First of all, if you feel the call, do it. Know that it's going to be difficult. It's difficult on families and finances and all those things, but it's the right thing to do. We had a big win, a 40-point win in the primary against a self-funded candidate. And I think that showed that, in primaries in the Democratic Party, there is a pragmatism. They understand the importance of heterodox views, particularly if you're running in a purple district. I do think often these things are the function of wave elections, particularly if you're a challenger. I think Democrats need especially to focus on building bridges. I've always believed deeply in sort of, the building coalition between the center right and the center left, reaching out to moderates, independents. That's what Democrats uniquely need to do because there's always, 50% more self-identified conservatives than liberals in our country. I think that this is a moment where there's going to be a lot of impulses for people to lean back. They're going to say, "Oh, I need a mental health break." And in effect, that's an ostrich option. I don't think that's sufficient. It doesn't mean you need to get crazy every day and have the Trump presidency ruin your quality of life. There are opportunities in every environment. I'd say my big takeaways are, I think the core of my campaign was rebuild the middle, right? We got to rebuild the middle of our politics, rebuild the middle of our economy. Those two things are connected. We hollowed out the middle of our politics. At the same time, we hollowed out the middle of our economy. My unified field theory of sort of what's been happening is the hollowing out of the middle class. The squeeze of the middle class has been driving the anger and disaffection. And Republicans have benefited. It's a little bit of an arsonist being a firefighter from some of the policies they put in place that hollowed out a lot of communities. Democrats need to focus on getting the big things right: public safety, border security, but rebuilding middle class, economic security. And I think Democrats also need to realize how much of politics, I think fundamentally on a guttural level, operates on a strength-weakness axis. And Democrats need to be seen as stronger. And reformers need to be seen as stronger. Democrats cannot be the party that defends the status quo. I've never thought in our recent polarization that the center is the status quo position. I think it's the insurgent position, but it's got to act like it.
Yeah.
I think you need to see reform as something rebellious, defending our democracy as something rebellious, and really build a movement where there hasn't been that energy in the past. And if Democrats aren't seen as the party of reform, they're going to keep getting their ass handed to them, I'm afraid.
No doubt. We'll be spending many more hours on that topic in the coming year. Lastly, we're pumped that you're in the family. We have a new pod from you here at the Bulwark called How to Fix It. You've had a couple of episodes. You talked to Tom Suozzi, Democrat from New York, on partisan gridlock, Richard Haas on civics. At the end, we kind of had a test run last year, and you had one episode with my man Ryan Holiday on lessons from the Stoics. It was really good. Talk to folks about what you want to do with this pod and what you got coming down the pike.
Yeah, man. It's something that we started during the late days of the campaign and got a great response on. And the response has been really phenomenal. The core idea, and this stems out of a longstanding frustration on my part as a journalist when I was at CNN, is we need to talk more about solutions and not just fixate on problems. And shockingly, there's white space here. Not a lot of podcasts are focused on finding solutions. And there's
a lot of problems out there for us to talk about.
Yeah, we can do that all day long, and people do. But really having focused conversations on how can we fix that in ways that aren't just play to the base partisan ideas, but ideas that could get bipartisan support. That's the focus of the podcast, of How to Fix It. That, I think, is something that's hopeful for people. It's empowering for people. If we only talk about our problems, no wonder if citizens feel sort of disempowered and dismayed. If we talk to issue experts about, hey, we can solve this together, not being pie in the sky that it's going to be easy, but there are areas that can find support from the center right and center left together. And that's the focus. And so, as you say, we've talked about civics education. We talked to Tom Suozzi, who said, here's some areas where Democrats might be able to work with an incoming Republican administration. And we'll get really focused. But I think it's important just to lay down a marker that we're not as divided as we seem, and that we can solve problems if we reason together. And that, as much as anything, is the flag we need to fly right now.
I hope you're correct. I'm not sure that you're correct, that we are capable. But I hope you're correct. And I'm excited for people. It's also good for people to take an hour away from all this and actually think through it. Use your brain, think through problems. I think that is healthy. I think that there's a demand for that. So I hope people enjoyed the pod. Excited that we're welcoming you as we say farewell to Joe Biden. Thanks so much, John.
Anytime, Tim. Thanks, brother.
Everybody else, we'll be back here tomorrow for a Friday edition of the podcast. Come on down. Peace.